Hey, welcome to the GP Podcast. This year at Grace Point, we're focusing on one thing, becoming more like Christ by really leaning into his character. Each month, our pastors have been discussing a different attribute of who Christ is and teaching us how to grow that same attribute in our own lives. But here's the thing, not everything makes it into those final sermons, and that is where this podcast called Side Notes comes in. Each month, Pastors Dan Painter and Jared Seeland will join us and share some of their stories and thoughts and interesting tidbits that didn't quite make it to the stage. It could be some of their personal experiences as well, or challenges that they've seen pop up in culture, or just extra notes from their prep. Think of it as the stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. Still really good, just, not part of the final message. So let's jump in and chat about last month's theme. Plus, of course, here's some of the side notes from our pastors. Welcome back to the GP Podcast. We're so glad you're with us. I'm Dan Royal, and of course joining us today are Dan Painter and Jared Seeland, our pastors here at Grace Point, Naperville, and Plainfield. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to sit in your office.
So kind of.
It's a good one.
Yeah. No, it's great to do this. I'm grateful that we get to sit down and have these conversations. It's great to be able to stop and we're in the next month. We're talking about peace this month, but it's really nice to take a moment to stop and to think back. It's so easy to rush on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And have learned things or agreed with things that we talked about in the last month.
Yep.
But then forget about them and rush on to the next thing without doing anything with what we just heard. Right.
Yeah.
And so I really do appreciate, again, to prepare for this, I have to sit down and go back because it's like my brain's in peace.
Yeah.
And so I have to sit down and think about, go back and reflect on what we talked through and where did God challenge me? And what have I done with it since that time?
So last month was wisdom. That was the topic. Wise like Jesus was what we were talking about. And I say we, I should say you guys. You guys were talking about it.
Well, we were all involved in the conversation. Yes, absolutely.
You were saying, we were thinking.
Yeah.
So let's start off with what were some illustrations maybe that you wish you could have included in discussing wisdom like Jesus? When we think of wise, I think everybody has in their mind a picture of somebody that they think is wise, somebody that they've run across, a guy that maybe for you has been influential in your life, or somebody that has led your family in amazing ways when you were growing up, or that person. Is there an illustration of a person that you can think of, or something that maybe you could have included or wanted to include but couldn't about wisdom?
I think I have some really good examples of people that I look to that I've considered to be very wise. There was an elder at our church years back. We've got current very wise elders as well, but Hal Munsell was one of our elders for a lot of years. And Hal, one of the things that I find about people who are wise, they do practice that James, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. And it's one of the things I really appreciated about Hal was that he was always that guy who was slow to get angry, and he was quick to listen and slow to speak. He just had this ability to slow things down in a healthy way. Right? Wow. Some people drag everything out, and that's unhealthy, right? And they're just trying to avoid things. But it's when a wise person knows that that whole idea, a quick response tends to be a really unwise response, right? You're just reacting. And so to choose to go, wait, I need to wait. Even today, honestly, there was a situation where I got upset and I was like, okay, I can respond right now or I can wait. And there are a lot of times where I've responded right now and regret it. Even sending an email back, just, how many of us have gotten
my last email?
Yeah. How many of us gotten an email and have been like, I'm firing a response right now. And then after you fire that response off, you're like, man, that was an unwise response. That was not gracious. It was not what I wish I had said. And if I had just slowed down and processed, I would have gotten some perspective, some wisdom that I needed. And so, one of the things I've learned along the way from a guy like Hal is just learning to go, I might write a response but I'm going to wait, like with an email. Sure. I may write a response, but I'm going to wait 24 hours at least before I send it.
Smart.
And I'm going to go back, I'm going to read it again because I want to make sure that I'm not just reacting, right? So that'd be somebody that I really looked up to Hal and that wisdom that he brought.
His son was a lot like him. He was
Yeah.
quiet, and
Yep.
he would reply when he felt it was necessary to reply.
Yeah.
That was something I noticed about him as well.
That's interesting. I feel like there's a deep root of that in confidence as well. Like so many people feel the need to walk into a room and make themselves known and heard and be loud. And it's fascinating. I think people quiet down quite a bit when the person who's slow to speak starts to speak. And I think I noticed that most in, I've obviously like a ton of incredibly wise people in ministry throughout my life and mentors, even working in parachurch ministries that came along and offered wisdom and how to navigate certain situations. But even to go beyond that to a different leadership culture in the military, like you have a leadership culture that really prides itself on being like brusque and in your face and
assumed
loud.
authority. There's a lot of assumed authority. You just
Totally.
whether you think it's wise or not, you gotta obey.
Yeah, and it's assumed authority, and it's also like conferred on them by whatever rank is on their collar. So legally, I have to respect this person as a certain authority. But what was interesting, this is maybe more leadership than wisdom, but I think they kind of go hand in hand more often than not. Where I had a leader who said the minute someone has to demand respect, they've already failed to earn it. And I just think that humility of walking into a room, like you guys are saying, in that quiet confidence and humility also just shows that, okay, you're dealing with somebody who's not just like the world. You're dealing with somebody who has a wisdom that is beyond the normal. And I think when Jesus walks onto the pages of history, he's the ultimate example of that, right? This guy who has this wisdom that surpasses understanding. And I think that's where like this series got off to a cool start, was just looking at Jesus from the angle of Jesus is everything that we always say he is. He is Lord, he is love, he is peace embodied. But for us in Plainfield, we started off with that Dallas Willard comment in the Divine Conspiracy that we often say Jesus is Lord, but that doesn't mean much if we don't believe he's smart. And I just think that's, when you look at Jesus as wisdom defined, it starts to change the way that we emulate him maybe.
When we were working on, writing this series out, one of the passages that for me was foundational to all of it is in Matthew chapter 10. And I'll just read one verse of it. But he says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." I like to make my own definitions, not to change the meaning, but to make sure I'm clear on the meaning of a word. And so I defined wisdom as the ability to navigate life, right? So as I'll say the whole definition, the ability to navigate life as a follower of Jesus, on mission to and in and to a broken world, right? So we're living in a broken world. It's dysfunctional. It's messy. It's chaotic. I'll talk about it this coming Sunday. But the sea often represents, in Scripture, it can prophetically represent the chaos of humanity caught under the power of sin, right? So it's chaotic, and we're in it, and we're on mission to it. Right, we're in the world to go on mission to the world as followers of Jesus, and as followers, we're representatives, we're ambassadors, and so we're going out as sheep among wolves on mission. And what do we need? Well, we need the ability to know how to navigate through that. I mean, we're called to love people, and at the same time, well, when you love, there's a risk. There's a lot of risk in that, and so he says, "I'm sending you out in this way. So be," he says, here's the command: "So be wise as serpents." And innocent as doves, right? You had that question that you're asking people, what does that mean? And I meant to actually talk about that, and I don't think I ever preached on it. But this idea of the innocent as doves is about integrity, right? It's no fake. There's no falseness. There is a what you see is what you get kind of living, where I'm not hiding, I'm not faking, I'm not covering up, I'm not. It's not hypocrisy. I'm not wearing a mask, right? So I have integrity, and that wise as serpents is really about being shrewd. It's recognizing that you're going on mission in a world where, what are wolves trying to do? They're trying to kill sheep, right? And so I don't want to be stupid. Like, I don't want to live in a way that's foolish and just let myself be taken advantage of.
Yep.
At the same time, I want to love people really, really well. One of the illustrations that came to my mind that I never got to share, and I'll share it very imperfectly because I haven't read this story in a long time, and so I'll do my best to do it justice. But it's a story about an evil prince who was forcing a father to allow him to marry his daughter. But the condition was that he had a bag, and in it were supposed to be two stones, a white stone and a black stone. And if she chose the white stone, then she would be free. And if she chose the black stone, then she would have to marry him. But he decided to set everything up by putting two black stones in, right? Because if they questioned him, he'd be like, "Wait, I'm the prince. Like, you can't question. You questioning
who would ask
my integrity, right?"
Yeah.
And so you didn't want to do that. And so the question becomes, well, how do you navigate that situation? What do you do in that moment? What does wisdom do in that moment? And the story goes that she reached into the bag and took out the stone, and before they were standing outside on the ground, and before she could show them the stone, which it would have been a black stone because both of them were black stones, she dropped it. It fell out of her hand to the ground among all of these other stones. And the question is, well, what stone did she pick? Well, she said, the way to know which stone I picked is check the bag, see which stone's still which is a black stone, which means then therefore it had to be the white stone, which he couldn't say, well, no, that, because then he would have been caught. He got caught by his own trap in essence.
Amazing.
But it's this idea of I'm not being deceptive, I'm not lying, but I am being wise. I am thinking through these situations and going, all right, I'm going to be put in these places, and I'm going to look at Jesus. How often were they trying to trap him?
Yeah.
And it's going, okay, how do I respond in a way that it doesn't get caught in the trap, it still loves them, and it still honors, right, the truth.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is our challenge as we're trying to navigate the messiness of this world.
And everybody thinks they're wise now. Everybody has an opinion, and they think that their opinion is the wise one.
Yeah.
So it's hard to cut through that clutter.
Totally.
And seeing it all the time like that. How would you recommend then that people find that wisdom? How do you find the wisdom like that girl with the stone? And like what are some ways that somebody could be in a situation like that and be like, you know what, I know what to do here. And it's almost I think like from my own personal life, I think a lot of it is you pray, you do the best you can, and you take that step forward in faith kind of thing. But I feel like there's more to it than that.
No, really great question. Because it's going, all right, how do I develop that? Where do I start? Well, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. How do we get to the wisdom? If wisdom is the ability to navigate life, then the best place to learn how to navigate life is the one who designed it, right? And the world is certainly not what God created it to be, but he is the sovereign Lord over it. He knows what he made it to be, and he also knows how to, Jesus came and he understands. He walked this way through this world in its dysfunction and brokenness, and did it without sin, did it perfectly in complete wisdom. And so the starting place is a relationship with God.
Yeah.
I often talk about our current context as being Ecclesiastes on steroids, right? And Ecclesiastes, the whole pursuit of Solomon, which is the pursuit of everybody in our world, is to try to find meaning and fulfillment in life under the sun. And the under the sun phrase is to find meaning in life, in this life, as if this is all that there is. That's really what he's going. He's going as if there's nothing and no one over the sun. Right? When you live as if there's no one over the sun, then you will necessarily not be able to navigate life in the way that you should, because it's meant to be navigated in a humble relationship with God, right? So I've embraced pride already. It doesn't mean that I'm not smart.
Sure.
Right? There's lots of smart people who don't believe in God. Don't get me wrong on that. But to have the kind of wisdom, to develop wisdom, it has to start with humility. I will not develop wisdom without humility. And that humility is recognizing there is someone over the sun. There is a creator and a designer of this. And if I'm going to know how to live this life, it has to start with him. I've got to start with him. And in that context of relationship, that passage in Matthew chapter 10, there's a lot more answers than I'm going to give here in this moment. But it starts with a relationship with God, which requires humility. You cannot learn anything. You can't learn anything without being humble, right? Because to learn means I don't know.
Yeah.
To say I don't know, I have to be humble, right? So it has to start with that humility. But what God's promise is, in that passage in Matthew chapter 10, he goes on and Jesus says, "Beware of men; they will deliver you over to the courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you'll be dragged before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious." It's a good passage. We should use this for our peace series. "When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you." One of the things we're always trying to figure out is, how do I, manage this situation? How do I learn enough to get there? And I have a responsibility side to this. But there's also a relational dynamic here in which Jesus is saying to these disciples in their context at that time, they're going to go through these places where they're going to be think of Stephen. Yeah. He's hauled before the authorities and he gets up and preaches to the religious authorities. You go, how did he do that? Well, it's the Holy Spirit. That's how he did it. God gave him the words that were needed to speak in that moment at that time. And so how do you get to that wisdom? Well, part of the way is it has to be in that relational dependence that puts confidence that God will enable me in the moment that I'm in to be able to respond and speak. But that's not the mistake we make with that is going, well, then I don't have to think.
Yeah, I don't have to prepare.
I don't have to work on any of this. And that. No, that's the relational part of it. Yeah, like I've got to be growing to know him. I've got to be learning from his word. I've got to be engaging in prayer and that constant humility. And so, it's not an excuse for laziness, mental laziness, or spiritual passivity. You can't be lazy and think God's just going to zap you in the moment. It is the relationship that, by grace, in which we have the confidence to go, he's absolutely going to provide and give me wisdom as I walk with him.
Yeah. I heard it said recently that in our society, technique has become the new religion. So we are obsessed with hacking the operating system of life. And that shows with whatever, if you want to make a YouTube video that hits 1 million likes or whatever, all you got to do is make it a how-to of some kind. Google will release its top results of how-tos, and usually it's how to make friends, how to talk to women, and how to fix something. Play guitar. And it's interesting that in this series on wisdom, a lot of people may expect that kind of a presentation, how to grow in wisdom. Well, it's easy. All you do is this, and you're done. Whereas that's not the case. But what it is rather, and I think we both set this up well, but it can maybe in different techniques, but to establish foundational practices that allow for the growth of wisdom. So it wasn't necessarily about how does a plant grow. It's more like, here's how you set up the soil well, and how you put it in the right environment for growth. And how do you do that? It's with humility. It's with community. This is one of the rare times that we kicked off a series through a different passage. And I think sometimes that works well, and you get different perspectives. But we looked at Jesus going into the temple as a boy and the humility that he exhibited when he, the creator of reason itself, the logos of creation, goes in and sits under teachers and asks questions and receives knowledge from them. And it's such a bizarre story when you realize like the cosmic reality of what's happening here, that the creator of the universe is sitting underneath the teaching of his creation. But it's one of those things that Jesus doesn't just give us instruction, but he gives us example. And it's really beautiful to think of the fact that Jesus chose to limit himself to human body, to human processes. And that even as an 8-year-old boy, he had to be setting up the fertile ground to grow in wisdom. Like the way that passage ends is that he grows in wisdom and in stature. And you think, man, there was something about the way that Jesus lived that allowed him to, by the time he was 30, and of course, an infinite, all-knowing God before that. But by the time he's 30, he's putting people to shame who are twice his age and asking silly questions like, should we pay taxes or not? And just like the girl who drops the rock out of the bag, he says there is a third way here. And every difficult or tense situation he diffuses, he's slow to speak, and then he finds that third answer. And I don't know that there is. I'm glad that we took that approach, because it would have been a much longer series than 4 weeks to say here's and we would not have had access to enough information to be able to preach that well. But just to foster the environment the way that Jesus did in his own life, to surround himself with community, to put his faith in the Father, to start with humility, and to have his eyes fixed on the hope of his identity and of his calling. And when we have those 4 things, and of course there are others, but those are what we focused on. When you have those things, that's when wisdom can really start to develop. And then you get down to the practical things, because once you're humble enough to realize you don't know everything, that's when you start to be driven to read more or contemplate more or to learn more. And all of those things are a part of growing in wisdom.
I think too, wisdom can be misconstrued. People start to believe that wisdom will answer all of their problems too. It's like the magic ticket. Yeah. And it's easy for people to get lost in if I just got smart, if I can figure all this out, my life will be easy. Yeah. It's less about that, and it's more about refining your life and becoming a better person.
It's navigation. It's not having all the easy answers. Or, again, it's not just knowledge, right? It's knowledge applied. But think of it like your a GPS, right? We all use our phones now for GPS. I don't know what we would do if our phones weren't working. I definitely get lost
Print out
going
those
home.
paper maps again.
Every once in a while I think about it, like when I'm driving in the city or something, like, what would I do if I didn't have my phone right now? But you think about it like we were just at downtown last week. My son, who's a senior, had a basketball tournament down there. Week of Thanksgiving every day. Well, not every 3-4 out of the 5 days of Thanksgiving week. Anyways, so down in the city and man, I'm telling you, coming back from going in and coming back, there were like the traffic was so bad. The great thing about your GPS though, when you use it and it's working the way it should, it gives you alternate routes, right? So it's like, hey, this up here, there is all this congestion, there's an accident, here's how you can get around that. And when you are, there was one point where we're driving into the city and it told me take a different route. And I was like, I don't know if I believe it.
Yeah.
Like, I think if I keep going straight,
I think I know what I'm doing.
I think I'll know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it to Sarah and she's like, I don't know, let me look into it. I'm like, well, I got to get off right now or I got to keep going straight. And I said, I'm just going to listen to the GPS and I'm going to get off. And it saved me like 20 minutes, because I listened. Yeah. I think it's not that it's going to take away all the traffic and all the challenges, but it's going to help me know how to navigate through them. So I might be stuck in some pretty bad situations for quite a while, but as I'm going through it, if I have that wisdom, I'm knowing how to walk through those moments. I'm knowing how to handle that conflict. I'm knowing how to handle that challenge, how to respond in a way that builds up and doesn't tear down. Right. So, it doesn't make
your life easier.
Easy.
Yeah.
It just makes it so that you can walk through those things in a way that is in alignment with who you were made to be and who you were saved to be. One other way to grow in wisdom is to listen to your wife. And I mean that somewhat funny, but I also mean it very seriously.
Yeah.
Like, again, relationships are an important part of growing in wisdom. Like that community is a key part of it. And, like I look at my wife as being extremely wise. And so having people in your life that are also wise, like you need a relationship with God, you need to be in his word, you need to have the right practices in place. Yeah. Relationships, community is certainly a part of that, because, we help each other to learn and to grow and to learn how to think about those things in a wise way. And then just last thing that I was going to say is, I was reading or listening to something that Kanye West said, which, it's like, if you're looking for wisdom, I'm about to I'm downloading it on you. Don't ask me why this is where I'm going, but Kanye West was talking about how, sometimes one of the mistakes we make is we're always trying to think and process through the answer to make sure it's the right answer. We're trying to make sure to say the right thing. And he goes, this shows. He goes, I'm not trying to think of the right answer. I'm just responding. Like, I'm just saying it. Just whatever comes to my mind, it's what's coming out, which is not wisdom itself. But the thing that struck me is I want to get to the point where I don't have to sit through. I think when I truly have that wisdom, I'll slow down and I will think, but I want to get to that place where what is coming out of me, I don't have to spend a huge amount of time thinking through how I respond to what you just asked me.
Right.
Jesus did slow down, but he was ready to answer. There was something that was ready in that moment. And I don't want to have to constantly be sitting and spending all this time just like noodling through this answer and through this response, but to be at a point where I am able to respond. It's wisdom that is flowing out of me because God's putting that wisdom inside of me. Yeah. I think, that's certainly what I see in Jesus, and I think that's really the goal to grow into.
Love it. Let's get into some of your notes as well. What are some notes that you were hoping to get into a sermon or two last month that just never made it in?
That is also a very good question. There's always a lot.
Crickets.
It's just a question of which ones. Yeah, there's always a lot. It's just a question of which ones. When we decided that we were doing this, the wisdom of Jesus, which was Jared's idea, which was a terrible idea. It was Jared's idea. It was a great idea. It was a great idea. This idea that we could somehow fit the wisdom of Jesus into a 4-week series is foolish, right? You can't do that.
Hence Jared's idea.
Terrible.
So in that sense, real bad. But in impossibility, right? You can't do it. We're going to spend our whole lives. He is the wisdom of God, right? He is the Logos of God. We'll spend forever delving into the depths of the wisdom of God and of Christ, and we spend our whole lifetime studying the life of Christ to see his wisdom and to learn from it. But we were trying to boil it down to go, what are the essentials? If I could have these 4 kind of pillars at the foundation, it would kind of lead to all of the others. And I don't know if we picked the right ones. I think they're good ones, but like one of the ones that I really, and you and I actually, I think one point we talked about it, Jared, was just the wisdom of surrender, right? The wisdom of submission. It's Jesus living his life in that constant, not my will, your will be done. Which is really the Lord's Prayer. I talked about it this last Sunday as a part of learning to walk in peace is that prayer that says, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which isn't just about when Jesus comes back, certainly about that.
Sure.
But it's also about right now in my life. Like, your kingdom has come, I want your will to be done. Not my will, your will be done. And that, I think, is a really you want to walk in wisdom. You can't do it without surrender. You cannot do it without that attitude that says it isn't about my will being done, because oftentimes my will is what I want is not what is best.
Yeah.
And so I am going to come and I'm going to ask God, and I'll bring my request in the same way that Jesus brought his request, on the night that he was crucified, right? I'm going to bring my request, but it is in the joyful surrender that says I'm good with not my will being done, because I know that your will is always best, even when it's hard. And so that was one. It's not necessarily,
Sure.
It was in my notes in different places, but it was one of those ones that I felt like it could have been its own message.
How would, I guess one question for me would be, how would surrender and humility be different?
Yeah, they're definitely connected. Humility is, I think that it is the correct estimation of myself, right?
Okay.
It is, it is understanding who I am, especially in relationship to God.
Sure.
I am needy. I am dependent, right? But you can't get to surrender without humility, right?
Which is probably why you covered that more than...
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But I think that surrender, that attitude of surrender is certainly where you get to when you are humble, right? That I will say, not my will, your will be done, right?
Yep.
I will be joyful in the fact that sometimes God says no to me, because he knows better than I do.
Well, I think it's interesting that we, as a society, I think often see wisdom as our cunning and our ability to implement our own will on our surroundings. So if somebody makes it to the top of a company or, hits a very high rank at a young age, you'd say like, man, they're wise beyond their years. Like I think that's one of the ways that we've like looked at it. So I really think that we could have spent that time, if we had a fifth week, spending it on what does it look like that, wisdom is not about implementing your will and being smart enough to get your will accomplished, but rather to surrender, like to use the gifts and the perspective that you've been given and to let that be informed by the Spirit to accomplish the will of God in the world. And I think that's one of maybe the end result of wisdom. And we talked about this a little bit with, avoiding traffic or, having an easy, it's not about having an easy life, right? It's about navigating life well. And that's beneficial for you as a person. The wiser person is going to have a more fulfilled life, but also beneficial for society as a whole. And look at the wisdom of Christ changed the trajectory of the entire world for 2,000 years. We look at some of the most impactful people throughout history, and there was wisdom that accompanied their accomplishments, especially in the early church and early human rights movements. And this last week, we even gave a shout out to Francis of Assisi, who was out there, sharing the gospel with the Muslim Empire during the Fifth Crusade. But there's so much of God's will that can be accomplished through the wisdom of his children. And I think that should be our number one motivator. So maybe the wisdom that can lead to world change would have been maybe the sixth week, or maybe jumping on the fifth week with that.
Yeah, we're going to keep building this.
We're going to keep on,
One of them,
stick around for part 2 next year.
That's right. Like
Next
one of the
year.
other messages I thought about was the wisdom of words, right?
Yeah.
Totally.
You read Proverbs and your language, the words you use, the things that you speak are so important. And clearly Jesus was James, right? If you can master the tongue, right? You keep everything in alignment. Jesus clearly had that. He is perfect. So your whole self is perfect if you can tame the tongue. Well, Jesus, he used his words with perfect wisdom, and in an age of instant communication, I'm thinking social media, right? How many people jump on social media and they see a post of something, that offends them? That happens all the time. And then we immediately respond, right? And we type out this really quick response to this thing and fire it off. And then it, begins this back and forth. And we've all seen it, right? And going,
but you're going to change their mind. I mean, if your comment is good enough, you'll change minds. You're
constantly, minds are changed on social media. It's constant. So it's a worthwhile investment of your time. But we just tend to use our words really poorly. And so that was one of the other ones. I was like, man, I think this is such a, but I think you get to that through some of the other pieces that we were looking at, but that would have been week 6 or week 7 in our
I like that.
Wisdom of Jesus series. We're going to write a book, and
that's true.
We're so wise that we will absolutely be able to. One of the things that didn't, it was in my notes. pretty much every week, and I don't know that I ever really said it or talked about it, because you asked the question, how do you grow in wisdom? Mm-hmm. And obviously talked about fear of the Lord in this, but James chapter 1, how do you grow in wisdom? You ask for it. I mean, not only do you have a relationship with God, but that's part of humility. Humility says, I need it. So then I actually speak up and say, Lord, help me. I need this wisdom. But he conditions it on asking in faith.
Yeah.
If you're asking, but you don't believe you're going to get it, if he's not going to actually provide that wisdom that you need, why would you expect, that you're going to get it? Right.
Yeah.
And so, if I really want wisdom, well, I need to obviously see my need, but then I need to be asking God and praying for that wisdom, and also recognizing that asking for it, God's answer is very rarely to just zap you with it. I don't like the fact, maybe I shouldn't say it that way.
We can edit it out. Just go with it.
Yeah. Let me say this, and then you change it. Make it sound better. We need that AI tool that Apple has, right? You type out the really bad email and then hit make it nice, and it changes it to something nice. Well, let me say it this way. What we all want is to pray and ask God for something and have him download it. It's like the Matrix.
Yeah.
Plug it into the back of my head. I get it downloaded, and I can go fly the helicopter, right?
Yep.
God, give me patience. You get plugged in. God downloads it. Now I'm completely patient. And right. God, give me wisdom. He plugs you in and he downloads it. Instead, God's constant answer is going, let me give you the opportunity to learn that then. Oh, God, give me patience. Well, okay, like my wife prayed for that and she got me. And so, he's like, look, let me give you the opportunity to learn how to be patient, right? And so if we're going to ask for wisdom, I believe that one of the ways that God answers that is by putting us into places that we're out of our depth.
And that's where I think fear is a big thing there.
Yeah.
We fear, well, what if we don't? What if this? What if that? And then the wisdom gets ignored.
Well, then we don't grow in wisdom.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm too afraid to step into those moments, guess what? I won't learn wisdom, because I'll only stay in the places where I feel most comfortable, where I feel like I can handle it. And so God goes, let me put you in places that you can't handle it, because that's the place where you have to lean on me. Yeah. That's the place when you're crying out to me going, God, I have no idea what I'm doing, which is most of life for me.
Sure.
It's like, God, I don't know what I'm doing. I need wisdom. But again, not asking as, I think too often we pray as these beggars who are asking God to do us a favor, and instead of praying like children who God loves and is like, if our kids ask us, you don't have one yet, they're on the way though, right?
Yeah.
If
April 10th, coming to you soon.
Awesome.
That's what I heard.
It's so great. But like if our kids asked us and said, hey, I want wisdom, how many of us would be like, yeah, no. Yeah, I'm not doing that for you. Like, if our kids were asking for help, we'd help them. Yeah. And so instead of praying like beggars, we have to pray like beloved children. Our Father loves us, and he loves to give good gifts. And so if we're asking for wisdom, is he going to give us wisdom? Yeah, he's going to grow us in that wisdom, but it will probably be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't like. I'd like to just be comfortable and learn wisdom at the same time. Is that possible?
Yeah.
But alongside of that, one of the illustrations that I really love, and I've shared it before, I didn't share it in this series just because people have heard it before, but the week that we talked about the wisdom of grace, which is, I talked about that as, grace teaches us how to see God's good purpose in pain. And one of my favorite illustrations is from Elizabeth Elliot, whose husband was murdered on the mission field. And then she married again, and that I think it was her second husband died of cancer, and just some real challenges in her life. And shares a story of a time that she went to a sheep farm, and the shepherd was leading the sheep up to this big vat and taking them and throwing them in the vat and then pushing them under the liquid that was inside of this vat, and it looked like from the outside in he's trying to drown them.
Yeah.
And she talks about how she's watching this happen and seeing their little eyes come up over the edge of the vat, as they're trying to get out of this liquid, and the shepherd's pushing them under this stuff, and it looks like he's drowning them. And in their eyes, she says, in their eyes, you'd see this desperate pleading of going, what's my shepherd doing to me? Yeah. Like, he's supposed to be protecting me and he's killing me, right? And it turned out, which I think there's a lot of times where we go through these challenges, and there's times when it feels that way. Like our shepherd sometimes feels like he's killing us. I mean, she was speaking of it from the perspective of the loss of her husbands and some of that pain that she'd been through. And she said, she talks about how that's absolutely not what the shepherd was doing in that moment. The shepherd was actually saving the sheep because the liquid was an antiseptic and it was killing all these parasites that get on the sheep. Yeah. And in order to kill them all, you have to immerse them for a certain period of time underneath this antiseptic to kill off these things. Because if you don't kill them off, they will kill the sheep. They just suck the life out of them. And just how that's really, I mean, look, if we could just kind of connect that with sin in our lives. We've got the parasites of sin on us that are literally killing us. Yeah. And God is immersing us in these things. Talks about it as a refining fire, right? I think that's Isaiah 48:12, been refined as silver in the fire of affliction, right? We go through these hard things and God is immersing us in what feels like he's killing us, but what he's really trying to do, he's trying to kill that stuff that's killing us and set us free from it. Yep. And so just this, and the reason I use grace as the lesson of that is because, well, that's the cross, right? The Son goes through the cross. God takes the greatest evil to accomplish the greatest good. And so can I trust him when I feel like he's killing me, that he's not actually killing me, he's saving me in the process. And 1 Peter 5, verse 6, one of my favorite sections of scripture, he says, humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God, that at the proper time he may exalt you. And under the mighty hand of God, it sounds like he's crushing you. But the language of the mighty hand of God is for his people, it's always the mighty hand of his salvation. And so it's this idea, not that God is crushing you, he's not pressing you down, it's actually a hand of protection over you. And you may be going through it, and you may be really suffering right now, but it's under his hand of protection. Not just his hand of protection over you, but his hand of protection within what's happening as he's using it for your good. And that challenge of having the wisdom to trust him and not listen to the lie of the enemy that says, no, he actually is trying to kill you. All I would say is I really enjoyed the series. It was such a great connection to follow up to love, right? Because I think, at times love can feel so foolish. It can lead us, if we're not careful, to doing things that are unwise. Sure. Right? Not true love. If we're really loving the way that we should, true love will be wise.
Love makes a fool of us all.
Yeah. But, that connection of going, I need to love, and that love is going to send me out on mission, but if I'm going to go on mission, then I need that wisdom. Yeah. And I need those two things together. Yeah. And, it's... having that conversation about wisdom is something that we always need to be having. It's something that I think we're always having to grow in. God loves us too much to let us get comfortable. And so we're always getting stretched into new seasons of life and new seasons for us in ministry, new seasons in marriage, new seasons with our kids. And each new season requires us to grow in wisdom. And so this is one of those things that we have to keep coming back to, and we have to keep developing and growing in and being intentional in and pursuing and trusting that I'm going to continue to need wisdom, and as God is faithful, he's going to continue to provide it. So certainly something we need to continue to, as we've shown already with a much longer series we could have done, something we always need to be learning and growing in.
Yeah, I think especially now in a world that has a tenuous relationship with truth at best, to think of wisdom as being deeply rooted to reality and, having an understanding of the reality that we were created for and how we were designed to function and to live. I think that growing in wisdom has some of the highest potential to, when Christians do it well, to be the brightest light in a dark world because... Yep. Well, because of the fact that we are pretty constantly being pulled into this cultural narrative of just relative truth and moral relativism. So I think that as we, as Christians, develop the wisdom of Jesus, it will be a pretty obvious light in a dark place to say we are grounded in reality, we are trusting the function that God has created us for, and we are trying to create and foster an environment where we can grow and develop in our wisdom.
Wisdom also creates peace. I think being wise, which leads us to next month's podcast.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
They will know we are Christians by our peace, I think, is almost more of a thing these days than love. Well, love too, obviously, but there's a lot of unrest right now and angst and anger and firing off all those responses online that you know you're going to change somebody else's opinion, of course, leads to that as well too. But guys, thanks for your wisdom. Thanks for sharing with us those things that didn't make it to the stage each Sunday.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this. And
absolutely.
Yeah, it's great to be able to sit down and talk through these things with you guys. It really is I really enjoy this time.
It is fun to review.
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
Well, thank you.
And we'll look forward to doing this again next month.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Same place, same time. And thank you for listening as well. Hopefully you got a lot of wisdom out of this. And next month we'll be talking about peace. So tune in, come back. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.